Welcome to Connecting the Dots with Bishop Robin Michael Beach, a nexus of profound theological insight and actionable leadership, spiritually and civically. From the arena of civic duty and government to the global mission field, we bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and 21st century reality. I am a spiritual architect, a scholar, and for these few moments, I will be your guide to a faith that is limitless. Now, let's begin the conversation. Let's connect the dots. You do not live by what you say you believe. You live by what you actually believe. And most people have never examined the difference. Let me say that again because it is the most confronting truth you will hear me say today. You do not live by what you confess on a Sunday morning. You do not live by the doctrinal statement posted on your church's website. You do not live by the quotes you share on social media. You live by what you actually believe. You live by the hidden architecture of assumptions that govern your checkbook, your calendar, your relationships, and your reactions to crisis. And right now, across the Western world, we are watching an entire generation wake up to the terrifying realization that the architecture they were handed cannot hold the weight of their actual lives. Welcome to Connecting the Dots. I am Bishop Robin Michael Beach. If you are joining us live today, I want you to drop your city in the comments right now. Let me know where you're watching from. We are building a global network of thinkers, leaders, and believers who are ready to navigate the complexities of this age with theological precision and spiritual authority. So drop your city and let's gather together. Now, we are in season 1, Faith, Hope, and Love in the Age of Fracture. Last week, we deconstructed the cultural architecture of loneliness and recovered the biblical blueprint of koinonia, the shared life. Now, today, we are tackling the first pillar of 1 Corinthians 13, which is pistis, or faith. Now, we're going to look at the phenomenon of deconstruction. We're going to look at why so many brilliant, sincere, Jesus-loving people are walking away from the institutional church. And we're going to look at why the modern definition of faith is completely inadequate for the age we are living in. If you have ever found yourself questioning the religious systems you were handed, if you have ever felt the tension between what you were taught and what you were experiencing, I want you to type tension in the chat right now. Just put the word tension in the comments, because in that you'll find that you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not crazy. So let's get into the text. Let's connect the dots. We have to begin by looking honestly at the cultural moment. Over the last 10 years, a word has entered the cultural lexicon that has terrified pastors, theologians, and parents alike, and that word is deconstruction. It is the process by which individuals, often young adults in the 21 to 45 demographic, systematically dismantle the religious frameworks they were raised in. They question theology, they critique the institutions, and in many cases, they walk away entirely. The institutional church has largely reacted to the deconstruction movement with fear, defensiveness, and condemnation. We have labeled these individuals as backsliders, rebels, or sometimes even casualties of a secular culture. We have told them they just need to pray more or read their Bibles more, but I submit to you today as a theologian and as a bishop in the Church of God that the deconstruction movement is not the enemy. The deconstruction movement is a symptom. It is the predictable, rational response of a generation that was given religion without revelation. Think about what we handed this generation. We handed them rules without reasons. We handed them morality without theology. We handed them a requirement for church attendance without the promise of genuine encounter with the living God. We taught them how to behave, how to vote, how to dress, and how to perform, but we did not teach them how to build an internal architecture that could withstand the complexities of the 21st century. And when the therapeutic culture came along, when psychology and sociology began to offer them language for their trauma, language for their anxiety, language for their relational dysfunction, they realized that the secular world was taking their pain more seriously than the church was. The therapeutic culture has given this generation the language of trauma and healing, but it has not given them the language of formation and transformation. So now we have a generation that knows exactly what they are from. They can articulate their religious trauma with absolute precision. They can deconstruct the toxic power dynamics of their former churches. They know what they are walking away from, but they do not know what they are for. Deconstruction is necessary when the building is toxic, but deconstruction is not a destination. You cannot live in a demolished house. And at some point, you have to reconstruct. And here is the tragedy. When people try to reconstruct their faith, they usually try to do it using the exact same tools that built the toxic house in the first place. They just simply try to find better arguments. They try to find a more progressive church. They try to read more enlightened theologians. They treat faith as an intellectual exercise. They think that if they can just get their intellectual ducks in a row, if they can just figure out the exact right way to interpret Genesis, or the exact right view on eschatology, or the exact right stance on social issues, then their faith will be secure. But that is not what faith is. The modern Western world has completely misunderstood the biblical concept of faith. We have reduced it to intellectual assent. We have reduced it to signing a doctrinal statement. And until we recover the original first century meaning of the word, we will never be able to reconstruct an architecture that can hold the weight of our actual lives. Now, if you are tracking with me right now, I want you to drop a yes in the comments. Now let's go to the Greek text for some theological deconstruction. Now, in almost every English Bible, when we read the word faith, you are reading a translation of the Greek word pistis. For by grace you have been saved through pistis. The just shall live by pistis. And without pistis, it is impossible to please God. In our modern English vernacular, the word faith means belief. It means agreeing that a certain set of propositions is factually true. If I say, I have faith that God exists, I mean I intellectually agree with the proposition that there is a supreme being. But in the first century Greco-Roman world, pistis did not primarily mean intellectual assent. It was a philosophical term. And more importantly, it was a relational term. Pistis meant covenant loyalty. It meant relational fidelity. It meant allegiance. See, in the ancient world, pistis was the word used to describe the faithfulness of a soldier to his general. It was the word used to describe the fidelity of a wife to her husband. It was the word used to describe the allegiance of a citizen to the polis, or the city-state. And when a Roman soldier pledged pistis to Caesar, he wasn't saying, I intellectually agree that Caesar exists. He was saying, my life belongs to Caesar. My allegiance is to the empire. I will live and die in fidelity to this covenant. Now, do you see how this changes everything? Because when the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 1:17, the righteous shall live by faith, he is quoting the prophet Habakkuk. But he is not saying the righteous shall live by believing the right things. He is saying the righteous shall live by covenant fidelity. See, we have turned Christianity into a multiple choice test. We think that if we check the right theological boxes, we pass the test and we get to heaven. We have made faith about getting our doctrine perfectly correct. But God is not a professor grading a theology exam. God is a covenant partner looking for fidelity. Now, let me prove that to you. The book of James says, you believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. James 2:19. See, the demons have perfect orthodox theology. They know exactly who God is. They know exactly who Jesus is, and their intellectual assent is flawless. But they do not have pistis. They do not have covenant loyalty. They are in rebellion. This is why modern institutional church is fracturing. We have spent the last 100 years demanding intellectual agreement from people, but we have not invited them into covenant fidelity. We told people, believe these 10 things and you are a Christian. But when tragedy struck, when their child got sick, when their marriage fell apart, and when they lost their job, their intellectual agreement could not hold them. Because you cannot learn or lean your weight on a proposition. You can only learn and lean your weight on a person. See, pistis is not a leap into the dark. It is not closing your eyes and trying really hard to believe something that doesn't make sense. Pistis is a relational response to a God has already proven himself faithful. It is the covenant loyalty that is awakened in you when you encounter the radical, unconditional, self-giving love of Jesus Christ. You don't generate pistis by reading more apologetics books. You generate pistis by encountering the living God and realizing that he is entirely trustworthy. If you are catching this revelation, I want you to type fidelity in the comments. Spell it however you have to. But let's shift our paradigm from intellectual agreement to covenant loyalty. So we have named the system, we have diagnosed the cultural architecture of deconstruction, and we have recovered the theological blueprint of pistis, covenant loyalty. But theology without application is just philosophy. We have to construct this in the real world. What does it actually look like to reconstruct your faith after you have deconstructed your religion? First, reconstructing faith is not about finding better arguments. It is about finding a better relationship. If you're in a season of deconstruction, hear me carefully. I'm not telling you to stop asking the hard questions. Ask the hard questions. God is not intimidated by your doubts. He is not nervous about your theological inquiries. But understand that your doubts are not going to be resolved by a perfectly constructed philosophical argument. Your doubts are going to be resolved by an encounter. See, pistis is rebuilt by the kind of lived experience of the faithfulness of God that makes covenant loyalty the only rational response. You have to put yourself in environments where encounter is possible. You have to surround yourself with people who are actually living in covenant fidelity, not just people who are talking about it. And second, you have to change the primary question you are asking yourself. The primary question of Western Christianity has been, do you believe in God? Now, that's a philosophical question. But the primary question of the kingdom is, are you living in fidelity to the one who has already been faithful to you? See, this is a relational question. When you wake up tomorrow morning and go to your job, the question is not, do I intellectually agree with the doctrine of the Trinity? The question is, will I conduct my business today in the fidelity to the ethics of the kingdom? When you are dealing with a difficult spouse or a rebellious child, the question is not, do I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture? The question is, will I practice covenant loyalty in this relationship, just as Christ has practiced covenant loyalty with me? See, pistis is an action. It is the architecture of how you live your life. And this is the call of the hour. God is moving his people out of the fragile architecture of intellectual religion. He is drawing them into the indestructible architecture of covenant fidelity. Because you were not made to pass a theology test. You were made to walk in a covenant. You were made to live in Pistis. And when you build your life on the foundation of covenant loyalty to Jesus Christ, it does not matter what cultural storms come. It does not matter what political shifts happen. It does not matter what economic crisis hits. A life built on Pistis cannot be shaken. Now, I want to take us deeper into the ancient world for a moment, because the modern misunderstanding of Pistis did not happen by accident. It happened because of a very specific philosophical shift that occurred in the Western Church around the 17th century during what historians call the Enlightenment. Now, before the Enlightenment, the Western world operated on a relational epistemology, a way of knowing that was rooted in trust, covenant, and community. Knowing was not primarily about individual intellectual certainty. It was about participation in a shared tradition, a shared story, and a shared life. But see, the Enlightenment changed everything. René Descartes sat down in a heated room in 1641 and decided that the only thing that he could be certain of was his own individual thinking. When he said this, "I think, therefore I am." And from that moment forward, the Western world began to rebuild its entire epistemology, its entire theory of knowledge on the foundation of individual rational certainty. And the church absorbed this shift. We began to define faith as intellectual certainty about theological propositions. We began to treat doubt as the enemy of faith. We began to demand that people suppress their questions, their uncertainties, and their lived experiences in order to maintain the appearance of doctrinal certitude. And we produced a generation of people who were terrified of their own doubts, who felt that if they admitted they were not 100% certain about every point of doctrine, they were somehow failing God. But here is the liberating truth. Pistis has never required intellectual certainty. Pistis requires relational fidelity. And you can be relationally faithful to Jesus Christ, even in the middle of a profound intellectual uncertainty. Look at the great figures of faith in the Hebrew Scriptures. Abraham did not have a systematic theology. He had a relationship with a God who kept showing up and proving himself faithful. Moses did not have a Bible. He had a burning bush and a voice that said, "I am who I am." Job did not have a satisfying theological answer to his own suffering. He had an encounter with the living God that was so overwhelming it made all his questions irrelevant. Faith, true pistis, is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to remain in covenant with a God who has already proven himself faithful, even when you cannot see the end of the story. The writer of Hebrews says that now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. And the word translated substance is the Greek word hypostasis, which means the underlying reality, the foundation, the bedrock. Pistis is not wishful thinking. It is not closing your eyes and hoping for the best. It is standing on the bedrock of God's proven faithfulness and declaring that what he has promised will come to pass even when your circumstances contradict it. This is the architecture of a life that cannot be shaken. Not intellectual certainty about every theological question, but covenant loyalty to the one who is entirely trustworthy. If you're catching this, type covenant in the comments. And let's keep building on the right foundation. So let me speak now directly to the person who is in the middle of deconstruction. You have taken apart the theological framework you were handed. and you are standing in the rubble and you don't know what to do next. And here's what I want you to hear. The rubble is not your destination. Deconstruction is a process, not a home. You cannot live in a demolished house. And at some point, you have to reconstruct. But here's the key. You do not reconstruct by finding better arguments. You reconstruct by finding a better relationship. See, the institution failed you. The institution was toxic or shallow or dishonest or abusive. So step one then is that we have to separate Jesus from the institution, because Jesus is not the institution. Jesus is the one who said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He is the one who sat with the woman at the well when every religious institution in her world had written her off. He was the one who touched the leper when the law said, "Don't touch." He was the one who wept at the tomb of Lazarus, not because he didn't have the power to raise him, but because he was fully present in the grief of the people that he loved. Step two is this. You have to find a community of pistis, not a community of perfect doctrine, not a community that has all the answers, a community of covenant loyalty, a community of people who are imperfect, honest, and genuinely committed to walking in fidelity to Jesus Christ together. You cannot reconstruct your faith in isolation. Pistis is a communal practice. It is built in the context of shared life, shared suffering, and shared mission. You need people around you who will hold you in your doubts without condemning you, and who will call you forward into greater fidelity without shaming you. Step three is you need to make pistis a daily practice. Every morning, make a decision, not a decision about your level of intellectual certainty, a decision about your allegiance. Today, I will live in fidelity to the ethics of the kingdom. Today, I will treat the people around me with the radical, unconditional love of Christ. Today, I will act as if the kingdom is real, even if I cannot feel it. That is pistis. That is the architecture of a reconstructed faith. Stop trying to believe harder. Start paying attention to what is already true. Pay attention to the faithfulness of God. Pay attention to the breath in your lungs. Pay attention to the grace that woke you up this morning. See, your job is not to manufacture certainty. Your job is to respond with loyalty to the one who loves you. So I'm asking you today, share this broadcast with someone who needs to hear it. I would be honored if you would subscribe to this podcast and come back next week as we continue to connect the dots. Father, I bless every person under the sound of my voice. I break the burden of religious performance off their shoulders. I declare that they do not have to carry the weight of intellectual perfection. Draw them into the deep waters of pistis. Awaken them in a fierce, unyielding covenant loyalty to you, born out of a revelation of your radical faithfulness to them. And may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the koinonia of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Launch forward, guys. I will see you next week on Connecting the Dots. You've been listening to Connecting the Dots with Bishop Robin Michael Beach. It is our sincere hope that today's insights have equipped you to lead with depth and live with clarity. To continue the journey and access more resources, look for me online at Robin Michael Beach Unlimited, or follow my work with Bridgeway Global across all platforms. Remember, the dots are waiting to be connected. Ain't ancient wisdom is yours for today's challenges. Until next time, stay provocative, stay authentic, and stay empowered. This has been a production of Robin Michael Beach Unlimited.